No more dramatizing or idealizing the world around you, but just paint how things really look like. A simple landscape, boats in the harbor, or some peasants picking up leftovers to feed their families. In the middle of the 19th century, an art movement called Realism emerged, and the artists who embraced these ideas would revolutionize the way we think about art, not only abandoning the neoclassical and romanticism art styles that were in vogue before, but also opening the doors for new art movements like Impressionism. And while the Realism Art Movement has been most popular in France and the United States, it was a British artist who had a big impact on the development of realism. His name was John Constable, a painter of landscapes. Constable looked at nature for inspiration instead of at historical or allegorical themes which were popular at that time. But whereas the works of Constable often included some architectural elements, the realists would abandon these beautiful elements and focus on nature and daily life itself. Another major influence on realism was the development of photography in the 1830s and 40s. The existing art establishment hated the realism movement because it meant that their life and interest were no longer the central focus of artists, but suddenly the normal people would get attention and could identify with the views captured on the canvas. And as change is never easy, it took some exceptional people who were stubborn enough to explore a new direction and persist in it. The French artist Gustave Courbet is widely considered the father of the realism art movement. He was not interested in painting poetic subject and history scenes, as he could not observe those things directly. He said that everything that does not appear on the retina is outside the domain of painting. And so, when asked whether he could paint some angels, he famously answered, "I have never seen angels. Show me an angel and I will paint one." Courbet's ideas were revolutionary, and the consequence of his artistic vision was that he painted subjects that he could actually observe in daily life. That meant no more idealized mythological events like those of Jacques-Louis David, allegorical scenes of Delacroix, fantastical biblical scenes by John Martin. Well, you get the point. Really things that he would observe in his daily life, like an ordinary funeral in his birthplace of Ornans. This is A Burial at Ornans from 1849. And as if it was not strange enough for an artist to capture such an event from his daily life, Courbet painted it on an enormous canvas to make his point, as it measures 315 by 660 centimeters, or 124 by 260 inches. In the footsteps of Courbet followed artists like Jean-François Millet, who painted this well-known scene known as the Gleaners. Just some peasants picking up the leftovers after the harvest. This was real life to the majority of the French people, not the high society life in Paris, which was portrayed usually. And perhaps needless to say, but artists like Millet and Courbet were not idealizing or dramatizing their scenes. They just painted them in the colors that they observed, which may not look that spectacular, but does reflect real life. Millet was a member of the Barbizon school, referring to a group of like-minded artists who lived in the rural village of Barbizon, some 40 miles south of Paris. Another member of this Barbizon school was Jean-Baptiste Camille Corot, who painted landscapes in a natural and objective style. He was not searching for beautiful vistas with spectacular light conditions, as you can see from these works with muted colors. And at this point, it's also good to mention that the realism art style does not mean that the works are full of minute details of reality. It was actually often the opposite. The artist did not put extra effort into finishing their painting, such that all details look polished. This is something that is typically referred to as naturalism. The realists were more concerned with the normality of the subjects that they painted. But unlike the Impressionists, the art movement after realism, the realists only made their sketches outdoors, but created their paintings in their studios. Whereas realism was first developed in France, American artists would also embrace this movement. One of the main proponents was Winslow Homer, an artist who painted things exactly as they appeared to him. He was a self-taught artist who did not study the paintings of others, and especially not any European art. His view was that if a man wants to be an artist, he should never look at paintings. This philosophy ensured that his art was unique and different. He is best known for marine paintings like this. He would sometimes wait for days to find the right light conditions, and once he found them, he would capture the sea as truthful as possible. Another outstanding American realist artist was Thomas Eakins. He was a people painter, and his primary concern with any painting was that he got the human anatomy right. So when asked to paint a scene of the crucifixion, he strapped his model to a cross to accurately capture the human body. You can see that he did not care much here for creating an elaborate background or believable surroundings. His prime concern was that he captured the crucified body as realistically as possible. Just as artists like Da Vinci and Michelangelo during the Renaissance, he studied the human body in all sorts of ways, like by dissecting cadavers. He methodically taught himself everything he could know about the human body, to the extent that he would even teach medical students about his findings. Eakins was also the director of the Pennsylvania Academy, where he changed the art curriculum, something that would have a lasting impact on art education until today. Before the changes, students first learned how to draw by copying plaster casts of ancient sculptures. But this made no sense to Eakins. Why engage in second-hand learning if you could immediately learn from drawing a living nude, to see the anatomy and all the motions of the human body? Eakins was quite successful in his extreme approach, and he received a lot of commissions for portraits. But Eakins was a realist in the truest sense, so when painting a portrait, he would not idealize the sitter in any way. The result was that most commissioners would refuse the portraits he painted. And I'm sure that you can understand this when you see these portraits that he painted. And these are only some of the ones that survived, as many commissioners would just destroy the painting he made of them or their family members. And just as a fun fact, half a century earlier, Francisco Goya also had the tendency to not flatter his subjects, like this painting of the Spanish royal family. I want to share one final thought with you, and that is why the art of the beginning of the second half of the 19th century is labeled realism. You may have asked yourself throughout this video, were there not very realistic paintings way before this period? The answer is of course yes, there were, especially with regards to portrait and landscape painting. But in the 19th century, these ideas were all combined, taking it to the extreme. Like a portrait must be lifelike, but does not necessarily have to please the commissioner, and it can be from some middle or lower class person as well. And you don't need to search for a pretty landscape or the perfect light conditions. You can also just glorify a simple landscape in relatively muted colors. And when doing so, you don't need to use a small canvas because the subject is not that important. You can use a large canvas as well. In the end, these artists were eternalizing the normal world around us, just like the early photographers would do. It may not result in the most aesthetically pleasing paintings that we can dream away with. It's just the plain truth. Well, I hope you enjoyed this discussion of the Realism Art Movement. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts and questions about realism, whether you like it or not. And finally, the best way to see future videos and support the channel is to subscribe, hit the notification bell and select all notifications such that you're automatically alerted when new videos are released. Thanks for watching.